All right, now that we've got everything essentially done, I want to give a quick review of everything. I feel like I missed some stuff or I sort of overlooked some things. So I want to sort of go back to the beginning and kind of explain concepts that may have been missed or reiterate things that I did already discuss. So first things first, I think I have yep. So one thing that is important to note here is when you use index.html, why did I select the name index.html? Is that because I like that name? No, it's actually because I can delete everything here and press this, and it still loads index.html. The way that generally it works when you have a server, if the server's designed for serving static HTML data, index.html is a shortcut it's a keyword that will be called. It's HTML that will be called when you don't put anything. So if I have something else here like main.html, it's going to say cannot get. There's nothing there. If I manually type index.html, sure, it loads it. But if I just leave nothing here, then it will still load this page. If I name this file something different than index.html, for example, let's say I called it index2.html. Now I go back over here and it no longer loads that file. It gives you a directory listing of all the files that are there instead. But if I do have an index.html file, instead it will actually serve that index.html file. So there is a reason why we use that. If we had other folders as well, like folders for other pages, and we had another index.html, we could do like slash contacts, and it would try to find the index.html in a contacts folder, etc., etc. So index.html does have a purpose. Another thing that I want to reiterate here is looking at our network traffic here. When I refresh this page, I'm actually loading a lot of different stuff. So I'm loading styles. First I'm loading the home page. Well, this is loading and it's pulling index.html. So this is the actual content of index.html. I'm getting styles.css, and that's coming in because we have this link relative style sheet keyword here, or this hyperlink reference to a style sheet here. So it's pulling that in. Main.js is the JavaScript content, and that's being pulled in through this script source. So because we're using script source, it's accessing that and it's returning the JavaScript data from this file. The profile.jpg is being called because we have this image tag here that's got a source of images, so it's got to load that image separately. And then finally, projects.json is the project's data here, and that's being pulled in by this fetch right here. This is fetching a URL. Another cool thing about fetch that I didn't discuss is we can use it to fetch data from other websites. It doesn't have to be internally from our own website. We can fetch. The fetch is designed to basically get the response data from any website we want to call. So if I were to let's just say I just type fetch example.com or https www.example.com, I'm not even doing anything with this data, but just because I'm calling fetch, if I actually refresh it, it's going to be pulling it in. It's I don't know why it's giving me an error, but it is trying to access that website. Why is it no data found? Maybe it's just that. Let me try it without the S. No? Oh, it looks like there's, yeah, I'm not sure why it's not pulling it in. How about Google? Okay, it is getting something from here. Failed to load, no content available. Oh, okay, because it's a redirected request. So there's some security things involved that are preventing it from pulling things from there. But you generally use this with APIs. Anyway, we can fetch from other websites as well. Just note that to be true. Another thing that I want to note here, let's go back to our HTML. Remember that our HTML, we have these sort of different functions on different elements. So for example, the header and the main and the footer, if we were using a footer, they're just designed for code organization. However, even though they're just designed for code organization, we can also use these as selectors for JavaScript. For CSS and JavaScript technically, but we can select these things. So for example, header doesn't have any of its own styling. However, we gave it styling, so now it does have styling. Another thing I didn't discuss that actually is going to require me to go to another website, H3 Schools or W3 Schools, default styling HTML, default browser elements. So the other thing that's kind of interesting here is that a lot of different HTML tags do have their own styling. So for example, H1, this is all the styling that is default, that is put there by default. Display block, font size, margin top, margin bottom, margin left, margin right. So all of this stuff, anytime that I use H1 in my index.html, anytime that I use H1, it has this styling already there. I can override that styling or I can add more styling to it, but it has that built in. Same with H2, same with H3. That's why I didn't have to apply any styling to those to get them to appear bigger at first, because they have their own default styling. Div has display block, which is why it creates new lines each time. Paragraph, has display block as well, which is why each paragraph ends up going on its own line. So a lot of these have their own sort of styling that are applied to them. It has some margin on top, margin on bottom by default as well. This also gives you a very nice list of all the available ones. LI, let me see here, UL. So remember in our CSS styles here, we overrode the styling for list style for UL. So by default, we have a list style here, but we changed it to none, and that's what got rid of the bullet points that were generally going to be in front of that. LI is display list item, but we overrode that with display inline, which is why they appear next to each other instead of on top of each other, because we overrode that styling with our own styling. So just important to note that a lot of HTML elements do have their own default styling. Some are simply there for organization, and some do have default styling that they're actually doing stuff with. So that's an important note as well. What are some other important notes here? Body on load. This is a way of running JavaScript after a page loads. And this is important because the JavaScript content will be loaded before the page is completely loaded, which means if I were to try to get this projects div, which is right here, projects div, where is it? This projects div, if I were to try to access this immediately, it wouldn't exist yet because that body hasn't been populated with all of this stuff. So by running the function after the page loads, I can ensure that all of this has been loaded in and I have access to all of this stuff in JavaScript, which is why I can add those projects dynamically. Console log is more for you, it's not for the user, although the user can see what you put in the console. If you want to have some fun, go to some popular websites and leave the console open and see what either the developers unintentionally left logged, or sometimes they put little Easter eggs in for you to check out when you're navigating some websites. The console also allows you to, do stuff over here. We can create variables. We can 1 + 1 is 2. We can do whatever we want over here. We can run JavaScript line by line in the console. We can even access, the divs the same way that we did before. I can do document.getElement by ID. And I could do the same thing I did before with, let's see, my header. Whoops. My header says, warning, don't paste code into the console. .inner HTML equals, this is stuff. And it runs it in here. Hey, be careful. This is how scammers can sometimes modify code to make it look like you have more money in your bank account than you really do. They're just modifying the code here. What else is important to note here? our JSON data. This is how we're storing our data in a separate location. And then we're calling it here with fetch. We're fetching that data. This is treated as a JSON object. And the way objects work is the main data is in an array, and the array is what's being wrapped around here. These brackets are an array. And then inside of the array are these curly brackets, which note an object. And any object has to have a key and a value. Key, value, key, value. And you can look up the value by using the key. And so you want all of these objects to have the same key like this. So these all have the same key: title, description, link, title, description, link. And by keeping those consistent, it allows us to dynamically create elements based on that data. Projects I.title, projects I.description, projects I.link, all that stuff. So basically we have a list. We're iterating through the list using a for loop. The for loop is starting at 0, and then it's incrementing one at a time until it hits the end of the list, but not including the end of the list, because the end of the list actually goes past, because we start counting at 0. So in this case, our projects are a length of 3 because it has a total of 3 elements. So this projects.length is actually going to be 3. But because we use less than, it only goes up to 2, which means it runs 0, then it runs 1, then it runs 2, which means we can access each of these elements. This is the 0th element, this is the 1 element, and this is the 2 element. Tooth element. These are all concepts that'll become much more familiar to you as you get more advanced into programming. This is probably a little bit advanced for where you're at right now if you're using this as a beginner's guide, so I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by any of this. If you have any questions, definitely ask. Finally, we are able to create HTML elements in JavaScript. And any element, anything that we create in HTML can be recreated in JavaScript. We create the element. Whatever this is going to be the equivalent of what this is. It's going to be the actual tag name, and by default an opening and a closing are created for it automatically. And then we can just add stuff to it. So we can add a class with ClassList.add. We can modify the inner HTML, so we can put whatever children text or whatever else we want to put inside there. And we can also append children to it like this. So this appends the 3 children here, and then the projects div has the div appended to it. Now we wouldn't want to append H3, P, and A directly to projects because we want that div container to have the project stuff inside of it. Functions are named here. You can call them like this. They have parameters often, which is stuff that you pass to it. So we passed the data that we got into this one, and then we got the information from that. They can also return something. They don't have to. So this function doesn't return anything. It's just doing something. This one does return something. If we have something that takes time, such as fetching data, we need to either run it asynchronously and await things to occur, or we need to use .then, which will run this callback function when the promise is resolved. And a promise, once again, is like an egg, and you're just waiting for it to hatch. And if you don't wait for it to hatch, you're going to have a lot of issues. Anything else? I think that's a pretty good summary of what we did. Hopefully that helps out a little bit. And ask questions if you need help.